And we continue our look at local races with the 4th Congressional District, a number of people on the ballot for that. And joining us first is Ryan Cooper. Mr. Cooper, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, sir.
First of all, we're giving our candidates the chance to make an opening statement. You have 2 minutes for that.
Awesome. My name is Ryan Cooper. I moved here in 2014 because I love the natural beauty of Washington. I love the people here in Washington. I've got family. I've got connections here in Washington. The reason why I'm running for Congress is we have a huge breakdown in what's happening with regard to legislation. You have members of Congress who basically are just fundraising machines. They go along with whatever Nancy Pelosi and with Mitch McConnell. And we have what we call enablers. Dan Newhouse is a great guy. I know him. He's been awesome. He's an enabler, though. He enables bad things to happen because he has to play along with the two-party system. The two-party system says, Team A, Team B, duke it out on these elections. They don't really get a whole lot accomplished. We need to have people who are independent, people like Justin Walsh, people like myself. I'm a libertarian because I believe in limited government, because I believe that you can make more choices for yourself, and I believe that this government has failed us in so many ways with regard to the shutdowns, with coronavirus, with regard to criminal justice reform, with Black Lives Matter. We give so much to the government, and what do we get in return? If this was a business, the government would have shut down years ago for incompetence, bad management, etc. Let's do something different this year. Instead of voting red or blue, let's vote gold, vote libertarian, vote for myself, Ryan Cooper, and for other great candidates like Anthony Welty for State Insurance Commissioner and Joe Jorgensen for President. Thank you.
Well, question number one, Mr. Cooper, what actions, if any, will you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
Yes, that's a very good question. So we just had a Supreme Court ruling, and I might add that on this issue, Neil Gorsuch, one of my favorite justices, was 100% correct. I'm glad he's on the Supreme Court. With issues about undocumented workers, there's an easy solution to this. Canada's already been doing this. It's called the bond system. The businesses pay a bond for every worker that they bring in to work for a season, typically here in Washington for picking fruit, etc. And then when the season is over, if they don't return the person back to their home, they have to pay the fee. So we can do this without a huge rigmarole of government paperwork. With regard to children coming in, the documented, which was what DACA stands for. Look, I have a friend that's actually one of those DACA people. He's now an adult. He was brought here at 3 years old. He didn't have a choice. He didn't say, no, I'm staying in Mexico. His uncle brought him here illegally, but he was brought here. You can't just force him back. Some of these people have never even been in their own home country. I know another person locally who, for whatever reason, her mom visited family, and her mom's an American citizen, her dad's an American citizen, but she came early, and she was born in Mexico. So at 18, she had to go back to Mexico, a place she's never lived in her whole life. She barely speaks any Spanish, and forced to live in Mexico because of some silly rules. Let's make it possible for people to live here. Look, people are paying taxes. They're not hurting people. Actually, undocumented workers create less crime than other folks. We need to stop with the hate and the xenophobia. Let's focus on the facts. Let's focus on how can we improve the economy? Right now, we need people working.
And sorry, Mr. Cooper, that's your time for that question. I hate to cut you off, but we'll move on to question number 2. Do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts at the national level? And if so, can anything be done to prevent or minimize those cuts?
Well, that's a very good question as well. I mean, that's a big issue. Look, the government created this mess years ago. They got to clean it up. It's been dragging on forever because you have competing interests on the state, local, and federal level. You've got, basically the federal government having no management oversight when it comes to receipts, reimbursements. I mean, we've seen evidence of all kinds of failures in so many levels from the government. There is a huge concern. I mean, we can't spend money forever. We're $26 trillion in debt. We've already done a huge stimulus package. We're probably going to do another stimulus package. And yeah, something's going to have to get cut, unfortunately. And I'd rather it not be that. But the more we spend money we don't have, the more things like the Hanford cleanup are not going to get paid for. things like building roads, things that are probably a little more important than some of the other things that we fund. Our military is way over budget. We spend more than the top 10 countries combined. We can cut the military. We can cut a whole host of other things. We have to live within our means. We have to balance the budget. So I hate to break it to everybody, but the hamper cleanup is probably going to be something on the chopping block, because people outside of where we live don't really know about it, don't really care about it. And most members of Congress will vote against things like the camper cleanup if it means getting other projects for their district.
10 seconds.
So we put ourselves in a bind by this massive debt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. And question number 3, what will be among the greatest challenges to agriculture and the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
Well, we're seeing it right now with the coronavirus. You have rampant inflation created by quantitative easing, where the government's just buying stocks, propping up the upper incomes in America. You have the government just shelling out money, throwing money around. That causes inflation. That causes things to go up in price. And then on the other hand, you've got huge, massive subsidies to big agriculture, to Monsanto, Archer Daniels Midland, people that give money to a lot of these political people, including some of our own congressmen here in Washington. So what we've got is a strange system where, farmers are barely getting by. They have to dump their product a lot of times because of shutdowns further along the supply chain, whether it's pork or milk. And then people can't afford to buy the stuff because the stuff that does arrive is so expensive because of government-created inflation. And then to top it all off, you've got Trump's trade war that has hurt farmers big time. We have to get the government out of agriculture. In this war on trade that makes absolutely no sense, let farmers sell directly overseas as we've done in the past, and stop this whole system of trade and bailouts and which often go to big businesses. Michael Jordan does not need an agricultural bailout. Neither does Bon Jovi and some of these other so-called farmers that are basically abusing the tax system by creating emu farms and collecting all kinds of subsidies. The average farmer doesn't get those things. So get the government out of this would help people out tremendously in our district.
And finally, before we let you go, a chance to give a 1-minute closing statement, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. So I know that in a primary race, most people are going to vote R&D. That's just a fact. And they're going to look at a libertarian and say, well, I don't know what a libertarian is. I don't know who this Ryan Cooper guy is. But actually look at all the candidates. You vote for me now, and if you decide you don't like me in the November election, you can always vote for the other guy. Because only 2 people move on. It's a strange system, this top 2 rule. In most states, I would be on the general election ballot because each party gets to pick their own nominee. Only in Washington do I have to compete in a primary and then not have to get the chance to even be on the ballot when everybody else votes. So that's my pitch to voters. If you've thought about having a different choice on the ballot, pick me. Pick somebody who's going to challenge Dan Newhouse on where he stands with regard to the size of the government. Because if you end up with a Democrat on the ballot, who's also a friend of mine, you're going to end up with people saying, well, I really don't like this guy, so I have to vote for that guy, and vice versa. Let's have a choice between 2 people that I like Dan Newhouse. It's nothing personal. I just think we could do better, and have a debate on issues instead of personalities and Team A versus Team B. That's my pitch to you. I'm Ryan Cooper, Libertarian, running for a Congressional 4th District here in Washington. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper, thank you so much for joining us, candidate for the 4th Congressional District.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me be on the air today.
And continuing our look at the 4th Congressional District race, joined now by Tracy Justice Wright, who told me before we started just wants to be called Justice. Justice, I'll first give you an opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement.
Hi, I have decided to run to represent you because I am running as an anti-slavery candidate. And Dan Newhouse has ran a plantation and has pushed the immigration H-2A thing through, which has benefited him by 200 acres since he has represented us. What it has benefited us is dirtier water, not providing jobs to Washington state citizens. And so I decided to run for that reason, because I was raised Free Methodist. I have two great-grandfathers who were pastors, and we were anti-slavery as we were raised up, and I went to push that platform throughout the whole U.S. Because I think that we need to have the jobs ourselves. They need to be living wage jobs, and our companies need to be focusing, if they're going to be U.S. companies, on making sure that we have living wages, clean jobs, and clean air, and time with our families. And that's one thing that's been excellent during this COVID time, is that we've had time with our families.
And your first question in this forum: what actions, if any, will you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
Well, DACA, I believe, is already the law. I believe that we already have a pathway for citizenship, and people can become citizenship if they meet certain criteria. And I think that that's what we should continue with, and we should support what we have already made commitments to. But in the future, we need to focus right now, since we're during the COVID time, on making sure that our citizens are having living wages and are living okay. That's all I have to say.
And a local issue to talk about: do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts at the national level? And if so, can anything be done to prevent or minimize those cuts?
Well, one way that we could minimize those cuts is to prioritize our spending in a much different manner. Right now, we have 70% of our federal budget spent on military, which that money could easily cover cleaning up a lot of the Superfund sites throughout the U.S. I, in fact, actually started my career measuring radiation levels. I wrote the programs that, or I should say, I maintain the programs that measured radiation levels at the Hanford nuclear site. And it is important that we have clean air and water, and that would be a priority that I would bring and push through the government.
And question number 3, what will be the greatest challenges to agriculture and the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
I think that we need to take this opportunity to step back and look at how we can go back to sustainable farming, and instead of these corporate farms that are so unproud of what they do that they have made laws that we can't see how they are mass farming our things and having animals treated cruelly, which passes through to our health. And so I think that we need to focus way more on healthy farming. And from my studies on that, it will take about an 18-year turnaround for us to do that. And the first step to that is to quit dumping chemicals and to go back to old ways of switching farms and agriculture back and forth, and going to get our nutrients back in our soil so that we do have sustainable farming. And that should take about 18 years. And it's going to take quite a commitment by our people to do that. But I think it is best for our families to have healthy food and water and air and time together.
And before we let you go, I want to give you the chance to give us a 1-minute closing statement.
Well, my statement that I am the most concerned about lately is that we've been talking about is the Black Lives Matter and what we should do with our police problem. And I'm over here in Grand Coulee, and we have 18 officers that work here, and we have very little crime. I think that those resources could be used way better for an education system that we have here, because we have a 3 out of 10 education system where we have a police force that is asking for $65,000 for night vision goggles to hunt, I guess, our dogs that are get out or our once in a while drunk driver that we have here. I think that our problem is that we need to prioritize our spending and that we need to focus on every interest is a special interest, not just big business and big corporations and big government. We need to reduce the size of government and focus locally.
All right. Well, Justice, thank you very much for joining us here today. I know it's unconventional, but we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
In our continuing look at the race for the 4th Congressional District, we speak now with Doug McKinley. Mr. McKinley, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, do you have an opening statement?
I do. I'm running for Congress because I believe the federal government needs to help regular people live a better life. And Dan Newhouse has fought every step of the way to make sure that that does not happen. 40 years of the same trickle-down, anti-worker, pro-corporate policies that Dan Newhouse has spent his entire public life fighting for have made everyone's life harder, except for a tiny cohort of multimillionaires. We need to change that. I have 4 sons who are all in their 20s. You and I both know that unless things change, my kids and yours will not have nearly the advantages and opportunities that we did growing up in this country. My goal is to make sure that every single kid in Eastern Washington has all the advantages and opportunities that I had growing up. And I know we can do it. The truth is we don't have to change very much to make America work again for regular working people. If we just get a few things right, we can turn America's problems around for everyone. We need wages to go up. We need American workers to get a bigger piece of the economic pie that they create. We need rents to come down. We need to build more affordable housing that doesn't price young people out of the market. We need a basic level of health care for every American that is affordable and that isn't tied to a job. Getting laid off shouldn't cost you your health care. We need to make college affordable. We need to stop saddling our young people with astronomical student loans just to get an education. We need to transition to clean energy, and we need to do it quickly. I believe that we can do all these things, and that when we do, people's lives will be much, much better. I believe in the United States. I believe that with everyone pitching in and doing their part, we're going to beat this coronavirus thing. But it isn't good enough to just go back to the way things were. We need to do much, much better. We need an economy that delivers a broad-based prosperity to everyone. We owe it to ourselves to have a country where a regular person is able to feed their family, own their house, pay their bills, give their kids a quality education, and have enough left over to go on vacation every now and again, and be secure in their old age. This campaign is about building that America. That is the promise we make to future generations, the promise that they will do better than their parents.
And question number 1 for you, what actions, if any, will you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
Well, I'm in favor of DACA. I think DACA is only a first step. If you think about it, you've got in our congressional district, you've got thousands and thousands of kids who are brought here at a very young age by their parents. They're 17, 18, 19 years old. And the DACA program allows them to stay, but it doesn't allow their parents to stay. At any time their parents can be deported. And, as the father of, young kids who are in their 20s, I just think, what would happen to my own kids if I were deported back to Scotland in the middle of their education? It would be a catastrophe for our family. So I don't think it's just enough to look at the DACA kids and say, provide them a pathway to citizenship. I think we have a whole community of people who've been here, 10, 15 years, a really long time. And what have they done? They've worked hard. They've lived by the law. They've paid taxes. And to tear those parents away from their kids, to me, it's a completely failed policy. It destroys families and it destroys communities. And we need to make a pathway to citizenship for all of these people is my position.
And question number 2, do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts on the national level? And if so, can anything be done to prevent or minimize those cuts?
Well, I think looking at the Hanford budget in terms of the overall budget is to look at a very small part of a huge problem. The coronavirus and the economic dislocation that it's causing is going to require trillions of dollars. Right now, this morning, Joe Biden came out with a plan to provide, massive amounts of money to make sure that American families are okay and get through this without hunger, without, being kicked out of their houses. Within those trillions and trillions of dollars that it's going to take to get us over this economic and health catastrophe, do we have enough money to stabilize the funding at Hanford and continue the cleanup? Absolutely. There are two things that I'm certain of. One is that if we elect Joe Biden president and we keep the Democrats in control of the Congress, we're going to be okay. We're going to fund the programs that are needed to get us through this economic dislocation. And two, that stable funding for Hanford will be a part of that.
And finally, what will be the greatest challenges to agriculture and to the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
The greatest challenges to the farmer in the years ahead, I think, are going to be built around getting these things right. Getting our immigration policy right, making sure that on the one hand, we have a stable, skilled workforce. You talk to any farmer that I know, and they'll tell you that we vastly undervalue the skills of the people who are working in their fields, many of whom are undocumented. And if they lose those people, they're unable to be profitable and productive. It's not just me who's asking to allow a pathway to citizenship for those field workers and farm workers. It's the farmers who depend upon them. I think, American agriculture operates pretty well. We do a good job of overproducing food. That's why we export so much of it. It's one of the bright spots of the American economy. I don't think we have to do a lot except make sure that we have a stable workforce and that the programs that are already in place remain in place and continue to provide funding for people who want to go into agriculture and allow them to grow and be prosperous.
And before we let you go, I'll give you a chance to make a 1-minute closing statement.
Well, Matt, as I was saying before, this country is facing a huge choice. The Trump administration, in my estimation, has completely mishandled the coronavirus. And in doing so, they made the economic problems vastly worse. Right now, you have two competing paths forward, and they couldn't be more night and day. The House had sent a bill over to the Senate 45 days ago asking for more relief for American families, huge percentages of whom are going to bed hungry at night because of this catastrophe. And Mitch McConnell won't even consider it. We're going to find out here in the next month when the funding for unemployment runs out, which direction this country will take. And I'm hopeful that we'll take a new direction that puts people first and not the interests of companies and corporations.
Doug McKinley, candidate for the 4th Congressional District, thank you very much for joining our forum today.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here.
And our continuing look at the candidates for the 4th Congressional District now brings us to Evan Jones. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to take part in this forum. It's a critical public service that you enable fresh voices to be heard in American politics, and I really appreciate it. Friends, my name is Ev Jones. I am the only nonpartisan independent running for U.S. Congress in this primary. First, I want you to know that I appreciate that so many of you have reached out to me over the last month on my website, evanjones.us, to support this grassroots effort to bring a new era of effective public service to Congress. This year, we have a golden opportunity to change once and for all how our representatives work in D.C. My independent candidacy is all about urging citizens in the 4th District and across America to snap out of our partisan days, ditch all of the ideological back and forth that we face on every single issue these days. You know what? It leads us nowhere, and that's why a lot of us regular Joneses are tired of it. What we need right now in Congress is a laser focus on work that leads to meaningful progress for communities. We need leadership that is courageous, not political, that is reliably shrewd, ever capable, well prepared for the job, that is upfront with us and is always entrepreneurial, using the best ideas from all sources to get things done. It doesn't matter who gets the political credit in the end. Just keep it above board and give us the reliable information and perspective that we need to make decisions and judgments that will help our families and businesses thrive in the 2020s. That's all we're asking for. I've put together a detailed 6-point plan for changing the way Congress works on my website, evanjones.us. I've also laid out ideas on 15 key issues where independent thinking can get us off the mat in 2021 and moving forward again. Reach out to me. Let me know what you think and where you want to go moving forward. Let's get this done.
Well, your first question, Mr. Jones, what actions, if any, would you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
Well, that's an excellent question. The bottom line is that current levels of immigration and demand in the United States aren't sustainable in terms of available jobs, quality of life expectations, equitable patterns of prosperity, and the realities of ecological sustainability that we now face. But we have to come with that to terms with that first. And it's not going to be an easy pill for any of us to swallow. But you're right. We have to start by coming to terms with permanently formalizing the recognition of all the hidden citizens caught up in the failed immigration system of the last 30 years. They've become productive and contributing citizens in everything but the paperwork, so we have to get it done. Then we have to work smarter on border security in the 2020s as well. We have to assess whether the 9/11 era immigration enforcement mission of DHS is still effective today and upgrade border infrastructure and strategy accordingly. We have to deploy innovative approaches to future unauthorized crossings as they occur at our borders, such as doing more to prevent unauthorized entries when possible at the source, deploying cutting-edge technologies and realistic physical barriers that can both decrease pressure on the border zones and prevent needless suffering of unauthorized residents or asylum seekers. Look, we need to explore the drivers in injustice and poverty in the Western Hemisphere as well that is causing the increased pressure at our border and pivot our diplomatic attention back to our neighbors again in the Americas who have been neglected for too long. If we can do this, we can remain the last best hope on earth.
And question number 2, do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts at the national level? And if so, could anything be done to prevent or minimize those cuts?
I absolutely don't see that. It's a commitment that has been made by the federal government. It's also a model for how the private sector and the government can work together on not only mitigating environmental risk and problems, but also on regulating on how we go about achieving prosperity and at the same time, minimizing risk on the environment. So I don't see Hanford in jeopardy. In fact, I see Hanford being continuing to be a model for how we upgrade our infrastructure and our response to the challenges of environmental performance in the 2020s.
And question number 3, what will be the greatest challenges to agriculture and the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
Well, just like a lot of our, the first thing I want to say is that we have made trillions of dollars in investments in shared agricultural assets over the last 200 years. I mean, literally since the beginning of the 18th century. The first thing we have to do is to make sure that we are maintaining the federal government's responsibility to those shared assets. Things like sustainable irrigation, things like the cooperatives that have been funded in at least some way by the federal government. But in addition to that, we also have to be aware that the American farmer has been subject to decreasing commodity pricing. There's been a explosion in the last 15 years of farm bankruptcies. I think we have to account for that as we move forward in 2021 with recovering from the COVID crisis.
And finally, before we let you go, an opportunity to give a 1-minute closing statement.
Sure. Friends, this is our chance to change Congress for good. Let's set a new tone for how Americans work together for progress. to help our families and neighbors have access to solid opportunity and to thrive. Let's work to reclaim the Constitution's promise of dedicated service by our representatives. Let's prevent the influence peddlers, the political celebrities, the media talking heads, or any negative political force from altering our focus. Let's now make open-mindedness and open communications the hallmark of service in Congress. And finally, let's tame the corrupting influences of party bosses and dark money. We're not alone. There are patriots in both parties and in the vast silent throngs of American independents who seek reform and recalibration in the nasty tone of politics. My friends, it's time that we brought an end to playing the partisan game and move forward with the business of democracy. Read my detailed plan for how we do it at evanjones.us. Thanks.
Mr. Jones, thank you very much for joining us today, candidate for the 4th Congressional District. We appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
And taking a look at another candidate in the 4th Congressional District race, we're now joined by Serena Sloot. Ms. Sloot, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, we like to get to know our candidates a little bit. If you have a 2-minute opening statement.
Sure. So I'm Serena. I've lived in Washington State my entire life. I've been taking care of people within different factions for almost 20 years. I've been a nurse practitioner for the past 8 years, and prior to that, I was a nurse. I've been every kind of nurse and really involved in healthcare leadership as a nurse practitioner for the past few years. I decided to go into private practice and open a small business of my own last summer, and had been working with some of our local sporting groups and members of the community, just doing some outreach in addition to my private practice when COVID hit. And when COVID hit, it kind of changed a lot of the direction of the things that I wanted to do from a leadership perspective for our community and our districts here. And as COVID became more involved and I was reaching out to different groups of people, I started to get more and more suggestion that I should take some of my thought processes and my solutions to a kind of a more political or congressional standpoint. And so the suggestion was made that I would make a good advocate and a good representative for us in our congressional district. And so I decided to run, and here I am today, hoping that I can share with you some of my thoughts and my beliefs, and you can decide if we align and if I would be a good advocate and representative for you.
And the first question we have for you has to do with DACA. What actions, if any, would you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
Well, for DACA, I think that there's two separate issues at play. Number one is that these people have been here. They've been productive members of our society. They deserve our support and a clear pathway and a role to citizenship. That being said, for the millions of our current citizens that don't get the same kind of financial support with college, support with payment aspects, I think that we need to make sure we're treating all of our education options equally. So I believe that we should have a pathway for citizenship for DACA, but I believe that we have to make sure that what we're offering is fair across the board for our citizens.
And question number 2, do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts at the national level? And if so, can anything be done to prevent or minimize those cuts?
Hanford cleanup has been ongoing since I was a child. Since I've grown up here, both of my parents were Hanford workers. I think that it has to remain a priority. The additional priority that we have to consider is there are a lot of factions to Hanford. You talk about like the possibility for medical isotope use with FFTF that we used to have before FFTF was closed down. I think that there is potential for concern if there are budgetary cuts, and we have to continue to prioritize Hanford, prioritize promotion of nuclear energy, and also other factions that Hanford can provide us, not only just focused on the cleanup, but also what good Hanford can do for our community and our state overall. And so there has to remain priority for funding for them.
And finally, what will be the greatest challenges to agriculture and the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
I think agriculture is struggling in the midst of this pandemic. You know, we go through what our potato farmers are experiencing with supply and demand, what our wheat farmers are experiencing, what our crop growers are experiencing, and how do we make sure that, you know, all of our agriculture has equal access to programs that support funding and support mitigating, keeping costs down for our growers, keeping, you know, the ability of our food chains and our supply in check, because this isn't the first we're going to see in regards to pandemics and in regards to, you know, potentially needing to isolate and potentially seeing that continued downfall as far as what our growers can get for our crops. I think we need to really focus on fair values for crops. We need to focus on legislation that promotes and maintains the farmers' ability to keep their crops going, even when harvest is not necessarily going to be as fruitful given supply and demand. I mean, agriculture is kind of the heart, particularly in Eastern and Central Washington, and we have to preserve it. And I think that, you know, federal funding, federal consideration for all sorts of agriculture, not just certain factions, is important.
And finally, before we let you go, I would love to give you the opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement.
Excellent. So, you know, I am by no means a politician. You know, my job has always been to take care of people, and how I choose to take care of my patients is sometimes even a little bit different than traditional means, in that I want people to have all the information. I don't need to tell you what's right. I don't need to tell you what to believe. I need to make sure that you have all of the information, all of the facts, so you can make an informed decision for yourself and your family. And my job is to make sure that we get that to you. My job is not to, you know, dictate or tell you what to do. My job is purely to advocate for you, for your rights and your beliefs, and to make sure that you have all of the information in order to make those decisions for yourself and your family.
Serena Slood, candidate for U.S. Representative in Washington's 4th Congressional District, thank you very much for joining us on this virtual forum.
Thank you so much.
Speaking to another candidate in the 4th Congressional District race is incumbent U.S. Representative Dan Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be with you.
First of all, we'd like to hear your 2-minute opening statement.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this forum together, even in the virtual world that we find ourselves. Appreciate their steadfastness in making sure the voters are educated and the candidates are given the opportunity to speak to people. So I'm running for Congress again because I continue to have work that needs to be accomplished on behalf of my constituents. I think I've been a tremendous advocate and spokesperson on behalf of the people of the 4th District, and I want to continue that work. I've been very engaged on many of the important issues to Central Washington, to the state of Washington, and also to the nation. And I think it's very important that we continue to have a strong advocate on behalf of the people that I represent. What are some of those issues? Certainly what comes to mind is the Hanford cleanup. I want to continue to make sure that the federal government maintains and follows through on its legal and moral commitment to clean up the environmental waste at Hanford. I also want to continue to work as strong as I can on behalf of our largest industry in Central Washington, that being agriculture. Being a farmer myself, I understand the challenges and the unique nuances of the agricultural industry, and I think I can continue to be a strong spokesman for that industry. And then on top of that, all of the challenges that we have seen over the last few months as related to the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to continue to work very hard to make sure that my constituents, my state, and certainly the country can move forward in as healthy a way as possible. We can reopen our economy, get our economic engines running again, and continue to be a successful nation. So I thank the League very much for this opportunity and look forward to the questions that they have prepared for me.
Well, the first question of those, what actions, if any, would you support to create a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, including DACA?
So I've been at the forefront of this issue since I was elected. Many people may not know this, but the 4th District in Central Washington has the highest number of DACA recipients in the entire state. In fact, as a Republican, I represent the district with the highest number of DACA recipients in the country, maybe save one other district. And so this is something that's been very important to me. I have met with hundreds of these individuals. They're huge contributors to our communities. They truly have an interest in making their homes a better place for them and their families. And I'm working hard to make sure that we can give them the certainty that they need to be able to become legalized citizens in our country. They were brought here under no fault of their own. In our country, in our society, we do not punish children for the faults of their parents, and that's something that I think that I'm committed to accomplishing. This is a bipartisan effort of a lot of colleagues that feel the same way. We just politically haven't been able to get there, but we continue to work hard, and I'm committed to making sure that this happens as soon as possible.
And question number 2, and you talked a little bit about this already, do you see funding for Hanford cleanup in possible jeopardy if there are budget cuts on the national level? And if so, can anything be done to minimize those cuts?
So it's always a struggle, let me tell you, no matter which party controls the White House, no matter which party controls the Congress, either the House or the Senate, ensuring adequate funding for the cleanup of Hanford is always an uphill battle. It's an expensive project that we have engaged in. It gets a lot of attention on the people in other parts of the country because so much money is coming to Central Washington. And so I've been very fortunate to have a great team of people. I work very well with particularly Senator Patty Murray in the Senate and across the aisle. We've been able to make sure and secure those necessary resources. And I'm confident if we continue to work in a bipartisan manner, continue to educate people around the country as to the importance of the project and getting the Hanford waste cleaned up, I think we will continue to be successful regardless of who's in the White House or who controls the Congress. But I will tell you, it's not easy. It requires constant work and education on our part with our colleagues in the Congress. And I pledge to continue to work as hard as I can to make sure that work continues as safely and as quickly as possible.
And this one you also touched on, agriculture. What will be the greatest challenges to ag and the farmer in the years ahead, and how might that affect the consumer?
Oh gosh, there's several things that come to mind, the big challenges. Being a farmer myself, I live these, so I understand, I think, as well as anybody, the challenges that agriculture faces. Certainly in arid Eastern Washington, water is always a challenge for us. Making sure that we have an adequate supply of water available, not only for the agricultural industry, but for our growing communities in Central Washington, for the industrial base, and for the environment. We want to make sure that fish as well can coexist with our society. As we mentioned a little bit, the immigration issues are key as well. I want to make sure that we have a legal workforce for the agricultural industry. I think that is just incredibly important. It's ridiculous that we have a multi-billion-dollar industry dependent on illegal source of workers. So I'm working hard as I can to fix that. And then we are very dependent on foreign markets. We are the closest state of the lower 48 to the Pacific Rim. Agricultural exports we depend on, and I want to make sure that those markets continue to be available to our producers who can compete with anybody in the world given a level playing field.
And before we let you go, I'll give you an opportunity here to make your 1-minute closing remarks.
Well, I appreciate that, Matt. And again, let me say thank you to the League of Women Voters for allowing me this opportunity visit with my constituents in the 4th District. It's been an honor and a pleasure to represent you over the last 3 terms of my career in Congress. And I will continue to be as committed as I possibly can to representing you, being your voice in Washington, D.C., in a very difficult environment, one that is becoming, unfortunately, more and more political. But I've learned my lesson well in Olympia, in the state of Washington, that the best way to get things done is to work in a bipartisan fashion, working across the aisle, working with people who don't always agree with me, and I don't always agree with them, but to find common ground as much as we possibly can so that we can move issues forward and our country can continue to be successful into the future. So thank you for allowing me to serve you, and I look forward to continuing to work for the constituents of the 4th District.
U.S. Representative Dan Newhouse joining us during a moment in D.C., I am to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.